A desert is a place where water is a memory and life a struggle. Yet ancient people turned these wastelands into gardens. This video reveals 25 hydraulic innovations that greened the ancient desert. By the end, you will understand how forgotten engineering can answer our own modern water crises. How did a civilization flourish in a city carved from cliffs with only a few days of rain each year? What secret allowed farmers to grow grapes in the heart of a blistering sand sea? The story of humanity is written not just in stone, but in the water we moved across impossible landscapes. What does it truly mean to make a desert bloom? The story of desert water begins not with invention, but with a profound and silent observation. People living in these harsh landscapes became the world's first hydrologists, not by choice, but by necessity. They watched the rare, violent cloudbursts that could carve new canyons in a single afternoon, and they learned to listen to the subtle whispers of the land itself. They saw how certain plants thrived in rocky crevices, capturing the morning dew, and how animals knew where to dig for moisture just beneath the surface. This intimate knowledge of a parched environment was the essential first innovation, the bedrock upon which all others were built. In places like the rock city of Petra, the Nabatean people did not see a barren desert. They saw a complex water catchment system made of stone. Their entire civilization was positioned at the nexus of trade routes, a deliberate choice that brought wealth, but also thousands of mouths to feed and water. Survival here was a calculated gamble against the climate. This pressure sparked something remarkable, the formalization of water management. What began as simple ditches to channel a flash flood evolved into a sophisticated discipline, one that required precise mathematics to calculate slopes, astronomy to predict seasonal rains, and a strong, centralized authority to maintain the intricate networks of channels and reservoirs. The drive to bring life to the desert was never just about agriculture. It was about stability, power, and a deep-seated human desire to create permanence in an impermanent world. To make the desert bloom was to assert a kind of divine order, a testament to a civilization's ingenuity and its right to thrive. This foundational era set the stage for the specific, breathtaking machines and methods we are about to uncover. This fundamental shift from observation to action gave rise to two distinct, yet often intertwined, philosophies of survival. Ancient desert engineers essentially faced a simple but profound choice. Do you wait for the water to come to you, or do you go and get it? This question split their monumental efforts into two strategic categories: water harvesting and water conveyance. Think of harvesting as a philosophy of thrift, of making every single drop of rain count. This meant building systems to capture precipitation directly where it fell, storing it for the long, dry months ahead. A farmer in the Negev desert might construct a low stone wall across a gentle slope, a check dam, to slow the rare downpour, letting the water soak into the soil right where his crops were planted. Or a family in Petra would carve a massive cistern into the solid rock beneath their home, a private reservoir filled by channels from their roof. Harvesting was about localization, resilience at the household or community level, a direct conversation with the local climate. Water conveyance, on the other hand, was an act of ambition. It asked, what if we could bring the river to the desert? This strategy focused on transporting water from a distant, reliable source, like a mountain spring or a permanent river, across sometimes staggering distances to where people needed it most. This was the realm of grand canals, deep tunnels, and elevated aqueducts. It required a different kind of knowledge, one of surveying vast landscapes, maintaining precise slopes over miles, and organizing the labor of thousands. While harvesting was about saving what you were given, conveyance was about rewriting the map. declaring that water would flow where civilization demanded it. The true genius of the most successful desert societies was not in choosing one strategy over the other, but in weaving them together into a single, resilient tapestry. A city might rely on a long aqueduct from a mountain spring for its main supply, a conveyance system, while every home and garden within its walls also had its own cistern to harvest seasonal rains, a harvesting system. This hybrid approach created a buffer, a redundancy that protected them. If a landslide blocked the aqueduct, the cisterns provided a lifeline. If the rains failed for a year, the aqueduct's steady flow prevented disaster. This ancient understanding of diversified water sources is a cornerstone of modern sustainability, a lesson in not putting all your resources in one basket. As we explore the specific innovations from humble terraces to mountain-piercing tunnels, keeping this dual strategy in mind reveals the layered intelligence behind each one. They were not just clever gadgets, they were calculated moves in a high-stakes game of survival against the desert. Beneath the sun-baked plains of Persia, a hidden river flowed. This was the Qanat, the first of our 25 innovations, and it represents one of humanity's most elegant answers to the desert. To understand its brilliance, picture not a grand aqueduct marching across the landscape, but its opposite, a secret. The Qanat is a gently sloping underground tunnel, engineered to tap a mountain aquifer far away and guide that water, purely by the silent pull of gravity, across many miles to where people could live and farm. It did not fight the desert, it worked beneath it. Originating over 3,000 years ago on the Iranian plateau, this technology did something miraculous. It made permanent settlement possible in regions where surface water vanished for months at a time. The construction of a Qanat was a monumental communal effort, a project that bound a village together for generations. It began with the discovery of a water-bearing layer at the foot of a mountain. From that point, skilled surveyors, using nothing more than simple sighting tools and an intuitive grasp of slope, would chart a path downhill. Workers then dug a master well straight down to the water table. From there, they began the painstaking work of digging the main tunnel backward, from the intended outlet in the desert all the way back to the mother well. Every 100 feet or so, they would sink a vertical shaft to the tunnel's depth. These shafts served a triple purpose. They provided air for the diggers, a way to remove the excavated earth, and later, a series of maintenance access points for cleaning the channel of silt and debris. The genius of burying the watercourse was profound. In the blistering heat, an open canal could lose half its water to evaporation before it reached a single field. The Qanat, sheltered in the cool earth, lost almost none. It was a conservation system built into its very design, but the Qanat was more than a piece of engineering. It was a social contract made of water. The flow from a single Qanat was meticulously measured and divided into time-based shares, often regulated by a water clock and a trusted local official. A farmer's share might be the right to channel the entire flow to his land for a specific number of hours each week. This precise allocation meant that a community's most vital resource was managed with transparency and fairness, preventing conflict and ensuring every family had a stake in the system's upkeep. The influence of this Persian invention did not stay in one place. It traveled the Silk Road like a precious secret carried by traders and engineers. From the Fagaras of North Africa to the Karez of Central Asia and China, variations of the Qanat system greened deserts across the ancient world. Each one was a testament to a simple, powerful idea that sometimes the best way to conquer a challenge is not to confront it directly, but to find a path beneath it. The legacy of the Qanat whispers to us from beneath the sands, a reminder that true sustainability often lies in working with the hidden logic of the earth itself. While the Qanat worked in secret beneath the sands, another civilization mastered the art of capturing water from the sky itself. High in the cliffs of southern Jordan, the Nabateans faced a different kind of desert challenge, one of violent abundance followed by crushing scarcity. Their city, Petra, was not built near a river but within a narrow, winding canyon called a sick. For most of the year, this place was a dry stone oven. But when the rare winter rains came, they came with fury, transforming the sick in minutes into a deadly, churning torrent. Where others saw only catastrophe, the Nabatean engineers saw opportunity. Their second great innovation was not to avoid the flood but to domesticate it. They built an intricate web of control, turning the entire city into a massive rainwater harvesting machine. They began by constructing a monumental dam at the very entrance to the sick, a barrier that could divert the initial, most destructive surge of a flash flood into a bypass tunnel, safely away from the main city gate. This was flood defense as a first principle, but the real genius was in what happened next. They carved channels called maddies into the very cliff faces that lined the canyon. These weren't just gutters, they were precise, gently sloping aqueducts that caught water streaming down the rock and guided it, like a network of veins, toward a heart of storage. The Nabateans lined these channels with a unique, impermeable plaster made from lime and crushed ceramics, ensuring not a precious drop seeped away into the porous sandstone. Every rooftop, every courtyard, every open square was also part of the plan. All surfaces fed into this system, channeling rainfall into a staggering number of underground cisterns. Archaeologists have found over 200 of these reservoirs carved deep into the bedrock beneath Petra. Some were small and private, serving a single household. Others were colossal public tanks that could hold millions of gallons. This captured bounty did more than just quench thirst. It created an artificial oasis. In the very center of the city, they maintained a lavish garden complex, complete with pools, fountains, and shade trees. A stunning display of luxury and power made possible by hydraulic engineering. The water also fueled industry, supporting the workshops of potters and metalworkers whose goods were traded by the camel caravans that were Petra's lifeblood. In essence, water was their ultimate trade secret. By guaranteeing a reliable supply in the middle of a barren desert, they could tax and resupply the wealthy merchant trains traveling between Arabia and the Mediterranean. Their control over this liquid currency is what built the towering temples and tombs we marvel at today. Petra stands as a powerful lesson in perception. The Nabateans did not lament their lack of a river, they redefined their entire landscape as a catchment. They understood that in the desert, water is never truly gone. It is only waiting in the clouds on the stone in the memory of the flood. Their legacy is a city that reminds us, civilization is not born from the resources you have, but from the ingenuity with which you gather them. The ambition to rewrite a desert's hydrology reached its zenith with the third innovation, the Roman aqueduct. While we often picture these graceful arches spanning the Italian countryside, their true test came not at the heart of the empire, but at its sun-scorched edges. In provinces like North Africa and the Middle East, water was not a convenience for public baths. It was the very glue holding the frontier together. To secure a desert border, you needed more than walls and soldiers. You needed to make that barren land feel like Rome, and that required an uninterrupted flow of fresh water, delivered with imperial certainty. So Roman engineers did what they did best. They built on a staggering scale. They surveyed routes for dozens of miles, carving stone channels or building elevated arcades that marched across the landscape with geometric precision, all relying on the relentless, silent pull of gravity. But the desert terrain was rarely a simple, steady downhill slope. It presented deep valleys and sudden ridges that a standard channel could not cross. Here, Roman ingenuity shifted from brute force to elegant physics. In places like Gadara in modern Jordan, they constructed inverted siphons. This involved building a sealed stone or lead pipeline down one side of a valley, across the bottom, and back up the other side. Because water seeks its own level, the pressure from the water column descending the first side would push the flow up and out the other side, even if the outlet was slightly lower than the inlet. It was a daring application of principle, allowing them to maintain their precious gradient across impossible gaps. This water was a direct projection of power. A remote legionary fort supplied by such an aqueduct could maintain not just survival but Roman culture. It could have its own bath complex, a social and hygienic ritual that defined Roman life. It could have splashing fountains in the commander's courtyard, a shocking display of luxury in a land of dust, and it could support small agricultural plots, providing fresh food to bolster morale and reduce reliance on vulnerable supply lines. The city of Caesarea Maritima, built by Herod the Great as a showcase of loyalty to Rome, was fed by an aqueduct from distant mountain springs. This water supply transformed a modest anchorage into a thriving, defensible port city, complete with a massive freshwater swimming pool carved into the seafront rocks. The Roman approach demonstrated a fundamental truth: greening the desert was not merely a local act of survival. It was a political and military strategy. It showed that with enough centralized will, resources, and engineering skill, you could impose a permanent hydrological order on the most reluctant landscape. The aqueduct made the desert legible and controllable to the empire, turning a threatening wilderness into a managed province. It whispered to every local tribe a clear message: Rome does not adapt to the desert will adapt to Rome. But for all their imperial grandeur, the Roman aqueduct was a statement of control, a one-way flow from source to settlement. In the deserts of the Indian subcontinent, a different philosophy took root, one that saw water not as a commodity to be delivered, but as a sacred presence to be approached. This brings us to the fourth innovation, the stepwell. In the arid regions of Rajasthan and Gujarat, where the sun reigns supreme and the monsoon rains are a brief, glorious reprieve, people did not just dig a hole in the ground. They built a descent into another world. Known as a vav or a bayoli, a stepwell is an architectural marvel in reverse. Instead of reaching for the sky, it plunges deep into the earth, a long, elegant staircase that follows the receding water table down into the cool, dark embrace of the aquifer. Its primary function was starkly practical: to provide a reliable water source during the long, brutal droughts when surface wells ran dry. But its execution was an act of profound reverence. The staircase was never a simple utilitarian ramp. It was a ceremonial passage, flanked by pillared pavilions on every level, their stone surfaces alive with intricate carvings of deities, mythological scenes, and geometric patterns. As you descended, the blistering heat of the desert above faded away, replaced by a damp, profound coolness. The air grew still, and the only sound was the echo of footsteps and the distant, precious trickle of water. This transformed the stepwell from a mere utility into a vital social and spiritual hub. It became a community center, a place where women gathering water could share news and stories in the shade. Traveling merchants and caravans would stop at renowned stepwells to rest, refresh, and trade goods in the sheltered pavilions. For many, the journey down to the water's surface was a ritual in itself, a daily meditation and an encounter with the divine source of life. The engineering was as clever as it was beautiful. The structure acted as a massive rainwater harvester, with cleverly designed channels on the surface funneling every drop of the seasonal monsoon down into the central reservoir, replenishing the groundwater. The tiered design ensured access regardless of how low the water level fell, a built-in resilience against climate's unpredictability. In this way, the stepwell represents perhaps the most holistic of our innovations so far. It did not just store water, it honored it. It blended utility with art, civic function with spiritual meaning, and individual need with communal space. It acknowledged the hardship of the desert not with a dominating aqueduct, but with a graceful, welcoming descent. The Stepwells stands as a powerful reminder that greening a desert is not only a technical challenge, it is a cultural one. The most enduring solutions are those that quench not just the body, but also the spirit, weaving the essential resource into the very fabric of daily life and belief. While the Stepwell honored water as a sacred descent, another river demanded a different kind of partnership. The Nile did not hide its gifts beneath the sand. It laid them out with a majestic, annual rhythm. For the ancient Egyptians, the desert was not a distant threat. It was the very edge of their world, a stark line beyond which the sands began. Their survival and the spectacular civilization they built depended entirely on a single, powerful act of cooperation with this cycle. Their fifth innovation was not a single tool, but a philosophy of harmony made concrete, a system of basin irrigation orchestrated by the humble Shaduf. Each year, without fail, the Nile would swell with the summer rains falling far to the south. This was the inundation, a flood that deposited a fresh layer of fertile black silt across the river's floodplain. The Egyptians did not try to stop this flood, they welcomed it. They built a landscape of low earthen walls, creating a vast network of large, shallow basins. When the river rose, they opened channels to let the silt-laden water flood into these basins, where it would settle and soak the earth. Then, as the river receded, they closed the channels, trapping both the water and the precious nutrient-rich mud within each contained field. This retained moisture would sustain crops for the entire growing season in a land where rain was virtually unknown. It was a form of slow, deliberate farming, using the desert's own aridity to prevent weeds and disease, while the river did the work of fertilization and irrigation. But the Nile's level was not constant, and fields needed water even after the floodwaters drained away. This is where a simple machine changed everything. The Shaduf was a study in elegant efficiency, a lever on a pivot. A long pole was balanced on a crossbeam with a clay jar or bucket on one end and a counterweight of mud or stones on the other. A farmer could lower the bucket into the river or a canal, then use the counterweight's help to lift it with minimal effort, swinging it around to pour the water into an irrigation ditch. With a chain of Shadufs working in succession, water could be lifted in stages to reach fields higher up the bank. It was technology scaled to human rhythm, one that required patience and persistence rather than vast engineering projects. This combination, the grand, passive strategy of the basins and the personal, active tool of the Shaduf, created something miraculous, a permanent green ribbon threading through the desert. It turned the Nile Valley into the breadbasket of the ancient world, supporting cities, monumental construction, and a stable society for thousands of years. The Egyptian approach teaches a subtle but profound lesson, one that contrasts with the Roman will to dominate. Their greatest hydraulic innovation was not conquering the desert, but creating a perfect, sustainable partnership with the river's natural pulse. They listened to the land's rhythm and built their calendar, their religion, and their entire economy around its faithful return. In a world of uncertainty, they found certainty in the cycle, proving that sometimes the most powerful form of control is intelligent adaptation. The Nile's predictable rhythm was a blessing of certainty, but in the land between two other great rivers, certainty was a luxury no one could afford. Between the Tigris and Euphrates, the ancient Sumerians faced a landscape of extremes, a volatile world of too much and too little. Their sixth innovation was born from this tension, a monumental act of environmental negotiation that would shape human history itself. Here, spring floods from distant mountains could arrive with devastating force, turning the low-lying delta into a vast, impassable marsh. Then, under the relentless summer sun, the waters would recede, leaving behind cracked earth and the threat of drought. The Sumerians' answer was not to choose between flood and drought, but to manage both. They became the world's first large-scale landscape architects, transforming a potentially hostile wetland into the fertile heart of a civilization. They engineered a vast, intricate network of canals, some wide enough for boats, others small channels feeding individual fields. These canals served a dual purpose. They drained the dangerous excess water from the marshlands, reclaiming land for settlement and farming, and they stored and distributed that same water to the drier regions further from the riverbanks. It was a system of hydraulic balance on a grand scale. To control the river's flow, they built earthen dikes and levees, and they constructed reservoirs to capture the seasonal surge. This allowed them to cultivate staples like barley, which thrived in the newly tamed soil, and date palms, whose roots could reach deeper moisture. The bounty from these fields fed the world's first true cities like and Uruk, places where thousands of people gathered, traded, and built towering ziggurats. But such a complex, sprawling water system demanded something new in human organization. Canals silted up, dikes breached, and water allocation between communities was a constant source of potential conflict. Managing this lifeline required meticulous record-keeping, coordinated labor, and enforceable rules. Historians suggest this very need for administration and fair distribution may have been a powerful catalyst for the development of writing and structured bureaucracy. The earliest known written documents are not epic poems or royal decrees, but inventories and accounts, lists of grain deliveries and water shares. In a very real sense, the need to manage water gave birth to the written word. This innovation did more than just feed a population. It created the conditions for urban life, law, and literature. By turning a challenging delta of marsh and desert edge into a managed garden, the Sumerians laid the literal groundwork for what we call the cradle of civilization. Their legacy is a profound lesson in complexity, showing that the greatest human achievements often spring from the practical, relentless work of managing a shared resource, of finding order in the chaos between two unruly rivers. The logic of survival often begins by looking not down at the ground but up at the sky. On the windswept, volcanic slopes of Lanzarote in the Canary Islands, the ancient Guanches people faced a paradox. They were surrounded by an ocean of salt water, yet lived in a land where rain was a rare and fleeting visitor. Their seventh innovation emerged from this contradiction, born from a deep reading of the island's own breath. They learned to harvest water from the air itself, using the dense sea fog known locally as kalima. This was not about capturing rainfall, but about intercepting the very moisture that drifted invisibly through the atmosphere. Their method was brilliantly low-tech and attuned to the landscape. They constructed loose piles of porous volcanic rock, or built low, rough stone walls across the paths of the prevailing winds. As the thick fog swept through these barriers, the tiny water droplets in the air would collide with the cold surface of the stones. The droplets would then condense, clinging together until they grew heavy enough to drip down. The Guanches dug shallow collection pits at the base of these walls where the precious freshwater would gather, filtered clean by its journey through the volcanic rock. This technique, a form of atmospheric water harvesting, provided a lifeline. It allowed for small, resilient gardens in the lee of the stones, where hardy crops could be nurtured with this nightly gift from the fog. It was a minimalist masterpiece of adaptation, requiring no moving parts, no distant water source, only a profound understanding of local microclimates and the patience to work within their constraints. The fog nets of Lanzarote stand as a quiet testament to a different kind of intelligence, one that seeks not to commandeer resources from afar, but to cultivate a conversation with the immediate environment. It whispers a powerful principle that in the most arid places, the solution may not lie in grand, earth-moving projects, but in the subtle art of listening to the air and asking the right questions of the wind. High in the thin air of the Andes, where the desert meets the sky, ancient farmers performed a kind of alchemy upon the mountains themselves. Their eighth innovation was to reshape the very bones of the earth, carving steep, barren slopes into a cascading symphony of green. These are the agricultural terraces known as Andeans, and they represent a hydraulic philosophy of total integration. For cultures like the Wari and later the Inca, the challenge was not a lack of water, but its catastrophic speed. In the high desert, a sudden rain could strip the precious topsoil from a hillside in minutes, washing generations of fertility down into the valleys below. The terrace was their answer, a step-by-step negotiation with gravity. By cutting long, level benches into the mountainside and reinforcing them with sturdy stone retaining walls, they did more than create flat land to plant on. They built a series of gentle stairs that slowed the water's destructive rush, forcing it to soak in rather than run off. Each wall acted as a barrier, catching the eroding soil and creating a deep, moist planting bed that grew richer with every season. But the true genius of the system lay in its arteries. Water was not left to chance. Engineers constructed intricate canals, often lined with fitted stone, to capture meltwater from glaciers and springs high above the terraces. This water was then channeled with meticulous care, entering the highest terrace and flowing from one level to the next through carefully placed stone spillways. This gravity-fed network ensured every plot, from the highest potato field to the lowest maize garden, received an even, life-giving share. The control was so precise that in some valleys they engineered distinct microclimates. The sun-facing terraces lower down would be warm enough for corn, while the cooler, shaded terraces higher up were perfect for potatoes and other tubers. This vertical archipelago of farms allowed a single community to cultivate a breathtaking diversity of crops, a built-in buffer against crop failure. The Andeans transformed the landscape into a productive, living machine. They fed the vast populations of the Inca Empire, turning once impossible slopes into the engine of a civilization. More than just farms, they were a profound statement about harmony. They show us that greening the desert is not always about bringing in a distant river, but about learning to dance with the water you have, guiding its flow with patience and stone until the mountain itself begins to bear fruit. The principle of the hidden river found a second home far to the east, along the ancient Silk Road, where the Taklamakan Desert whispered promises of both wealth and oblivion. Survival depended on a borrowed secret perfected under a new sky. This is the ninth innovation, the Karez of the Turpan Basin. Here, the Aigha people mastered an art of subterranean geometry, adapting the Persian Qanat to the specific rhythms of their own land. Their challenge was the same, to bring life-giving water from the distant, snow-capped Tian Shan Mountains across a scorching plain to the oasis city of Turpan. But their execution became a legend of its own. Teams of skilled diggers, known as Mukani, would begin at the fertile foothills, locating the subterranean flow. Then, working with an almost mystical understanding of slope and soil, they would tunnel backwards toward the distant settlement. These were not mere holes in the ground, but engineered arteries, sometimes stretching for over 30 kilometers, a distance that would take a full day to walk on the surface. Every 50 paces or so, a vertical shaft was sunk to the tunnel's depth, creating a line of circular wells that dotted the desert like a string of beads dropped from the mountains. These shafts provided air, allowed for the removal of excavated earth, and served as permanent markers for maintenance, a dotted line on a hidden map. When the water finally surfaced in Turpan, it flowed into open canals, a sudden, shocking ribbon of blue in a world of beige and gold. This was not just water for drinking, it was the lifeblood of an agricultural miracle. The people of Turpan used it to cultivate vast vineyards, creating a paradise of grapes in one of the world's most inhospitable deserts. The sweet fruits were dried into raisins and traded along the very Silk Road that had likely carried the knowledge of the Karez itself. But the system's true strength lay in its social fabric. Maintaining the labyrinth of tunnels was a sacred, communal duty. Each family was responsible for the section nearest their vertical shaft, cleaning silt and reinforcing walls. The distribution of water was governed by a complex body of customary law, overseen by a respected watermaster who allocated time-based shares with meticulous fairness, using notched sticks or water clocks to measure each farmer's turn. The Karez of Turpan is a profound lesson in cultural translation. It shows how a brilliant idea is not simply copied but reborn. The Igers took the Persian Qanat and made it their own, weaving it into the legal, social, and agricultural tapestry of their oasis life. It became more than a tool, it became a covenant between a people, their mountains, and the desert they vowed to green. This adapted innovation created pockets of emerald along the trade routes, proving that the most enduring technologies are those that sink roots deep into the community that tends them. Deep in the canyons of the American Southwest, a civilization built its home in the sky. The ancestral Puebloans, often called the Anasazi, faced a desert of a different kind, one of high plateaus and deep, shadowed gorges where water was a fleeting treasure. Their 10th innovation was a masterclass in meticulous, small-scale conservation, a hydraulic system woven into the very fabric of their cliffside world. At places like Mesa Verde, they understood that every drop of rain was a prisoner of gravity, destined to rush off the flat mesa tops and vanish into the dry canyon bottoms below. Their genius was in building a network of gentle, persistent invitations for that water to stay. Across the broad stone tables of the mesas, they constructed low-check dams from rock and earth. These unassuming barriers did not hold back floods, they performed a subtler magic. They slowed the sheet of runoff after a storm, giving the water time to pause, to sink into the soil, and to nourish the roots of plants growing just behind each dam. This captured moisture was then channeled through carefully laid stone conduits into larger, plaster-lined reservoirs carved into bedrock, creating community savings accounts of water for the long dry spells. But their ingenuity did not stop at capture. In their gardens on the canyon floors and shelves, they practiced a form of agricultural alchemy known as gravel mulching. They covered the soil around their corn, beans, and squash with a layer of small stones. This simple blanket served a dual purpose. It shielded the moist earth from the searing sun, dramatically reducing evaporation, and at night, as the temperature dropped, dew would condense on the cool undersides of the rocks and drip down to the roots. It was a passive irrigation system powered by the desert's own daily temperature swing. Every element of their settlement reflected this water-centric logic. Their famous cliff dwellings were not randomly chosen for dramatic views. They were strategically positioned beneath overhangs near natural seeps and springs, where water would weep from the sandstone. From these precious sources, they built intricate, small-scale channels and diversion walls to direct seepage to their terraced gardens on the canyon slopes. This was not the grand, imperial hydrology of Rome, but a deeply local, intimate conversation with a microclimate. Their entire society was calibrated to the careful husbandry of a scant and unpredictable resource. This allowed them to cultivate the three sisters, maize, beans, and squash, in a land that seemed to forbid such bounty, supporting complex communities in those soaring cliff alcoves for generations. Their legacy is a powerful lesson in scale. It proves that greening the desert does not always require monumental, landscape-altering projects. Sometimes it is about 1,000 small, smart interventions, a patient partnership with every raindrop and every grain of soil, turning a vertical wilderness into a sustainable home. Beneath the fairy tale spires of Cappadocia's landscape lies a world turned inside out. This rocky heart of Turkey holds an 11th innovation, one of profound shelter, the vast underground cisterns that sustained entire cities in the earth. While the region's famous cone-shaped rock formations capture the eye, Its true genius was carved in the dark, a hidden network of chambers that turned scarcity into security. Communities here faced a double challenge: a semi-arid climate with unpredictable rains, and the constant threat of invasion across the open plains. Their response was to retreat not outwards but downwards, engineering multi-level subterranean refuges like Derinkuyu, which could house thousands. At the core of these underground settlements was a simple, vital question: how do you keep a hidden population alive for months without surfacing? The answer was water, stored with meticulous care. They carved deep, bell-shaped reservoirs directly into the soft volcanic tuff, often lining them with a thick, impermeable plaster to seal every crack. The design was elegantly efficient. On the surface, a network of discrete channels and carved gutters would capture every possible drop of rainfall and snowmelt, funneling it through shafts down into these central cisterns. The underground environment itself became a preservation tool. Shielded from the searing sun and dry winds, the water in these cool, dark chambers lost almost nothing to evaporation, remaining fresh and potable for extended periods. This was not merely a water tank, it was a strategic reserve, a liquid fortress that enabled a community to withstand a siege or endure a prolonged drought entirely out of sight. The presence of these reliable cisterns transformed the underground cities from temporary hiding places into self-sufficient habitats, complete with ventilation shafts, communal kitchens, stables, and chapels, all orbiting around the vital, still water at their heart. This innovation speaks to a hydraulic philosophy of resilience through concealment. It highlights how, in arid zones under threat, water storage becomes more than a practical need. It is the cornerstone of defense and community identity. The cisterns of Cappadocia remind us that sometimes survival depends not on controlling the landscape above, but on mastering the secret, sheltered world below. While some cultures sought to hide from the flood, others learned to court it with breathtaking audacity. In the highlands of ancient Yemen, where the monsoon rains arrived with a roar and then vanished for years, the Sabaean civilization built their wealth not on steady rivers, but on the calculated capture of chaos. Their 12th innovation was a dance with disaster, the monumental Spate irrigation system. Here, water did not flow, it attacked. Dry riverbeds known as wadis would lie silent and empty for seasons on end, mere scars in the landscape. Then, without warning, a distant storm in the mountains would send a churning, destructive wall of water and debris roaring down these channels, a flash flood capable of wiping away anything in its path. The Sabaeans did not flee these torrents. They built great stone arms to embrace them. They constructed massive diversion dams like the legendary Marib Dam directly across the wadis. These were not dams meant to create a permanent lake, they were strategic deflectors. Their purpose was to intercept that violent, silt-rich flood and steer it, tamed, into a pre-built network of primary and secondary canals that spread out like veins across the downstream plains. This was agriculture by avalanche. The floodwaters carried more than just water, they carried the very essence of fertility, a thick slurry of fine sediment and organic materials swept from the distant highlands. By spreading this muddy bounty across their fields, the Sabaeans performed a miracle of renewal with every flood. They replenished the soil's nutrients and soaked the earth with deep moisture that could sustain crops through the long, rainless periods that followed. This high-risk, high-reward strategy demanded more than engineering. It demanded a sacred timing and profound social cohesion. The entire community had to be ready to mobilize when the flood came, to manage the canal gates and ensure the life-giving mud was distributed fairly across the fields. The reward for this perilous partnership with the flood was legendary. The fields around Marib became so fertile they could reportedly yield 2 harvests a year, a bounty that fueled the engine of the frankincense trade. The precious resin harvested from trees grown in these irrigated groves was worth its weight in gold to the empires of the Mediterranean and the Near East. Thus, water captured in a moment of violence was transformed into enduring wealth and power, proving that in the desert, the greatest opportunities often arrive not as a gentle rain, but as a thundering gift you must be brave enough to catch. A different kind of desert challenge awaited the Aztecs in the Valley of Mexico. Here, the problem was not a complete absence of water, but its chaotic, undrinkable abundance. Surrounded by vast, shallow lakes that were often brackish and swampy, the Aztecs looked upon this challenging wetland and saw not an obstacle but a canvas. Their 13th innovation was to build a garden from the water itself, creating the astonishing floating farms known as Chinampas. These were not boats but artificial islands, constructed with a brilliant understanding of materials and hydrology. Workers would stake out a rectangular plot in the marshy lakebed, then weave a sturdy fence from the reeds that grew in abundance. Inside this frame, they layered mud scooped from the lake bottom, along with decaying vegetation and other organic matter, building up a rich, fertile bed that rose just above the waterline. Willow trees were planted at the corners, their roots growing down to anchor the entire structure securely to the lake floor, preventing it from drifting away. The genius of the system was in its self-watering design. The porous sides of the Chinampa plot sat in the canal water that surrounded it. Through capillary action, the water would naturally wick up through the soil, keeping the roots of crops perpetually moist without any need for manual watering or complex irrigation channels. It was a constant, gentle sip from the lake. This created a microclimate of incredible productivity. Farmers could grow multiple crops each year, from maize and beans to tomatoes, chilies, and flowers, in what were essentially perpetually moist, nutrient-rich raised beds. The canals between the Chinampas were not just water sources, they were highways. Canoes glided through them, carrying fresh produce to the great city of Tenochtitlan, and returning with nutrient-rich human waste collected from the city, which was then composted to fertilize the next planting cycle. This created a closed-loop system of astonishing efficiency, where waste became food and water became land. In the heart of a basin with problematic lakes, the Aztecs engineered not just a solution, but a paradise of plenty. The Chinampas transformed a difficult lacustrine environment into the most productive agricultural system in the ancient Americas, capable of feeding a city of hundreds of thousands. Their lesson is one of radical adaptation. It teaches us that greening a challenging landscape is not always about importing a distant resource, but about ingeniously reconfiguring the resources you have at hand, weaving water, earth, and plants into a living, breathing system of mutual support. Sometimes the most profound solution is also the simplest one to watch in motion. The 14th innovation, the water screw of Archimedes, turned the exhausting, back-breaking work of lifting water into a kind of graceful, mechanical poetry. Attributed to the brilliant Greek inventor Archimedes, the device was elegantly straightforward, a large helix like a giant screw, enclosed within a hollow, tilted cylinder. When its lower end was placed in a river, a drainage ditch, or any low-lying water source, and the handle was turned, the rotating spiral would catch pockets of water, lifting them steadily up the tube until they poured out the top. It was a continuous, flowing ascent. While this invention was not created exclusively for the desert, it found its perfect purpose in the arid, sun-drenched gardens of Hellenistic Egypt and across the Middle East, where every drop lifted was a victory. Its genius lay in its beautiful efficiency. Unlike a bucket that required constant dipping and hauling, the screw provided a non-stop stream, allowing a single person to irrigate a much larger plot of land. This made it ideal for watering the tiered, elevated garden beds that were popular in the region, where gravity-fed channels alone could not reach. It could also reverse its role, tirelessly draining flooded fields or the bilge water from ships, proving its versatility. The water screw did something remarkable. It amplified human effort through clever geometry. It bridged the ancient gap between the simple, personal labor of the Shaduf and the vast, impersonal scale of aqueducts. It was a machine scaled to the individual farmer or community, a tool that empowered people to reclaim more challenging land, to lift water just that critical few feet higher to make a new field viable. In the grand narrative of desert hydraulics, it represents a pivotal moment, the point where human ingenuity began to build not just with earth and stone, but with motion and mechanics, turning the crank of progress to bring life a little further up the slope. The relentless sun of coastal Peru left a landscape of dust and stone, a hyper-arid desert where rain might not fall for a generation. Yet here, the Moche people built a civilization of stunning artistry and complex ceremony. Their 15th innovation was a quiet, underground conversation between clay and root, a system of ceramic subsurface irrigation that turned scarcity into a precise science. They faced an environment so dry that surface watering was a losing battle, with the sun drinking up a canal's gift before it could ever reach a plant's thirst. Their answer was to take the water underground to the very place it was needed most. Artisans crafted special, unglazed pots with porous walls. A farmer would bury one of these vessels next to the seedling of a precious maize plant or a bean vine, leaving only its neck exposed at the surface. Periodically, they would fill the buried pot from their canal-fed water supply. Then, something beautiful happened. The porous clay acted not as a barrier but as a mediator. Water seeped through the microscopic gaps in the ceramic at a slow, steady rate, weeping directly into the soil surrounding the plant's root zone. This was irrigation by whisper, not by flood. It created a perpetual, moist halo around the roots, a personal oasis for each plant, while the surface above remained dry and barren, offering no invitation for weeds to grow. The efficiency was staggering. It minimized loss to evaporation and deep percolation, ensuring nearly every drop served its purpose. This method was a direct ancestor of our modern drip irrigation systems, a testament to an ancient understanding of plant needs and water conservation. By using this targeted approach alongside their larger canal networks, the Moche achieved the impossible. They cultivated fields of life in a desert that defied it. This agricultural bounty did more than fill stomachs. It fueled a cultural explosion. The surplus from these carefully tended gardens supported a society with the time and resources to create breathtaking metalwork, elaborate pottery depicting their gods and myths, and to construct immense adobe pyramids like the Huaca del Sol. Their ceramic pots, humble tools of survival, were a foundational technology, proving that sometimes the most powerful innovations are not the loudest or largest, but the ones that work in silent, intimate partnership with the earth itself. Deep beneath the sands of the Sahara, a civilization wrote its history in water. In the blistering heart of what is now Libya, the Garamontes people faced a landscape that offered no rivers and only the rarest of rains. Their 16th innovation was an act of profound geological memory, a network of underground tunnels known as fagaras that reached back in time to tap a treasure locked in stone. They were not harvesting the rain of today, but mining the rainfall of millennia past, drawing from vast fossil aquifers, underground reservoirs filled when the Sahara was a green and wetter world. Their method echoed the Qanat, but its purpose was even more audacious. Teams of diggers would tunnel down through the desert floor, sometimes for hundreds of kilometers, to intercept these ancient, saturated layers of rock and sand. The tunnels were gently sloped, allowing the pressurized groundwater to flow freely along them. Guided by gravity toward the surface oases they were determined to create. When the water finally emerged, it was a miracle of resurrection, bringing sudden, shocking life to a dead expanse. Around these artificial springs, the Garamontes built fortified agricultural settlements. They cultivated date palms whose deep roots and tolerance for heat were perfect for the environment, and grains like wheat and barley, nourished by the constant, reliable flow from below. This engineered bounty did more than feed a scattered tribe. It fueled a sophisticated, urbanized society with written language, complex social structures, and a capital city, Garama, that thrived as a hub for trans-Saharan trade. Their caravans, laden with goods like salt and precious stones, moved along routes they themselves made viable, challenging the very idea of the desert as an impassable barrier. Their story is a powerful testament to human adaptability, showing that a civilization can flourish even in the most extreme environment if it can decode the hidden resources beneath its feet. Yet their legacy also carries a whisper of caution. The water they tapped was not a renewable spring, but a finite inheritance, a bank account of ancient rainfall with no present-day deposit. Research suggests that over centuries of intensive use, the water tables eventually fell, and the slow, inevitable decline of the Fagara flows may have contributed to the gradual fading of Garamantian power. Their achievement stands as a monumental chapter in the story of desert greening, a brilliant example of exploiting deep geological resources to create life. It reminds us that the most ambitious hydraulic projects are not just feats of engineering, but dialogues with time itself, drawing on the past to sustain the present, while asking urgent questions about the future we are creating with every drop we draw. The story of water in the desert is often one of hidden currents and buried treasure. In the dry lands of Eastern Africa, communities perfected a 17th innovation that transformed a riverbed's very nature, turning a fleeting flood into a permanent, secret spring. This is the sand dam, a masterpiece of patient logic. In regions where rivers are not ribbons of water, but wide, sandy paths that lie empty for most of the year, people built a simple barrier. Using locally gathered stones or a mix of concrete, they constructed a low wall straight across the seasonal river channel. Its purpose was not to hold back a lake, but to perform a quiet alchemy. When the rare, heavy rains finally arrived, the river would awaken as a churning, muddy torrent. The sand dam would stand in its path, not to stop the water, but to slow it. As the flow decelerated, the heavier particles of sand and silt would settle out, piling up behind the wall. The clearer water would then continue over or through the dam, but something vital had changed. The riverbed behind the structure was now elevated, filled with a deep, porous reservoir of sand. This is where the magic happened. A huge volume of rainwater would seep down, saturating that sand bank, where it would be stored safe from the hungry sun and dry winds above. The sand itself became a natural filter, cleansing the water as it percolated, while the thick layer of sediment on top acted as an almost perfect seal against evaporation. Months later, long after the surface had returned to a barren, sandy track, the secret remained. Villagers could return to that spot, dig a shallow well, or install a simple hand pump into the saturated sand and draw out cool, clean water. It was like tapping a hidden aquifer they had built with their own hands. This low-tech, community-built system required no distant engineering expertise or complex machinery. It turned a landscape of scarcity into one of resilience, greening entire valleys in places like Kenya for generations. Small garden plots could be nurtured near the riverbanks, fed by this reliable dry season source, bringing pockets of green life to communities that had learned to plant their water underground, inside a filter of their own making. This innovation speaks to a profound wisdom that sometimes the most reliable solution is not to chase the water, but to help it settle, to give it a safe, dark place to rest until it is needed, proving that in the desert, the gift of a river is not always in its flow, but in what it leaves behind. Water management could define not just a farm or a city, but the very soul of an empire. In the lush, monsoon-drenched landscape of Southeast Asia, the Khmer Empire faced a paradox of abundance. For half the year, the skies opened, delivering torrential rains that could drown the land. For the other half, the sun reigned, and the earth baked under a relentless dry season. Their 18th innovation was to build a metropolis that was, at its heart, a vast liquid machine. Anchor was not a city with a water system. It was a water system that manifested as a city. At the core of this vision were the barrays, immense, geometrically perfect reservoirs that acted as the empire's hydraulic heart. The West Barray, for example, is an artificial lake stretching 8 kilometers long and 2 kilometers wide, a staggering feat of earth-moving that still holds water today. But these were not just giant bathtubs. They were the central capacitors in a brilliant, integrated network. A web of canals, some wide enough for royal barges, connected these reservoirs to a sprawling grid of rice paddies that fed the population. During the monsoon, the canals and barrays captured the destructive floodwaters, preventing the low-lying city from being swamped. Then, during the long, rainless months, the stored water was released in a controlled flow, irrigating the rice fields to produce 2, sometimes even 3, harvests a year. This reliable surplus of food is what allowed Anchor to support a population that historians estimate may have reached 1 million people, making it one of the largest pre-industrial urban centers on Earth. Yet the system served a purpose far beyond the practical. Water was the sacred medium of Khmer cosmology. The barrays and moats were designed as symbolic representations of the Hindu cosmic ocean, with the temple mountain of Angkor Wat at the center representing Mount Meru, the axis of the world. The king, as a divine ruler, demonstrated his power and his piety by mastering this elemental force, by literally ordering the waters to rise and fall according to the needs of his people and the rituals of his faith. Every canal was a prayer in stone and earth, every release of water an act of both agriculture and devotion. This fusion of utility and symbolism created a landscape of profound harmony. The hydraulic city planning of Anchor demonstrates the ultimate scale of our theme, showing that water management can be the central organizing principle for an entire civilization. It was the rhythm section of daily life, the engine of the economy, and the canvas for sacred art. The legacy of Anchor whispers a powerful truth that to green a challenging climate, whether desert or monsoon, is to engage in a form of world building, shaping both the land and the human spirit in the image of water's essential, life-giving flow. Time itself became a currency in the arid cities of ancient Greece. The 19th innovation in our journey was not a dam or a canal, but a measured, philosophical approach to fairness, embodied by the clepsydra, the water clock. In the bustling, sun-drenched agora of a Hellenistic city like Priene, the public fountain was not merely a convenience, it was the very heart of civic life. Water from a distant spring or a modest aqueduct flowed into a central reservoir, but the demand from thousands of citizens, their households, and their workshops could easily outstrip the supply, especially during the long, dry summer months. How could a society ensure that this most vital resource was shared not by force or wealth, but by principle? The Greeks turned to the steady, impartial drip of time. A clepsydra was a simple device, a ceramic vessel with a small, calibrated hole in its base. It would be filled to a specific mark, and as the water drained out at a constant rate, it measured a fixed period. A city official, often a publicly appointed water steward, would use this clock to time the access each district or even individual household had to the main flow. A farmer on the city's outskirts might be granted the right to open a clay pipeline valve to his property for, say, 3 clepsydras worth of time every Tuesday morning. This method transformed an abstract idea of fairness into a tangible, audible ritual. It meant that every citizen, from the wealthy merchant to the potter in a humble workshop, received an equitable share based on a communal agreement, not personal power. This system reflected a deep philosophical commitment to isonomia, equality before the law, applied to the elemental level of survival. The technology of the clock was seamlessly woven into the urban fabric. Terracotta or lead pipes, often stamped with the name of the public official who guaranteed their quality, snaked beneath the streets, feeding not only private homes but also numerous public fountains where anyone could fill a jar. These fountains were social hubs, places of conversation and community, made reliably active by the orderly schedule the clocks enforced. In this way, the ancient Greeks linked the flow of water directly to the flow of time and the health of the polity. Their innovation was less about conquering the desert and more about civilizing the distribution of scarcity. It was a declaration that in a dry land, justice must be hydrological, and that the truest measure of a civilization might be found in how it counts the drops for every one of its people. The steady drip of a water clock measured fairness in a crowded city, but on the lonely hilltops of southern England, farmers listened to a different rhythm. Our 20th innovation brings us to a landscape that is not a true desert, but shares its fundamental thirst, the chalk downlands. Here, the soil drains so quickly that even in a rainy climate, the high pastures could become parched and barren in a summer drought. The ancient solution was not to dig a well, but to build a skyward-facing bowl, a dew pond. These were shallow, perfectly circular depressions carefully excavated on the very crests of hills, where they seemed most exposed and least likely to hold water. Their magic was in their construction. Diggers would line the hollow with a thick layer of puddled clay, a sticky, impermeable seal. Then they would often add a protective blanket of straw or chalk rubble, and finally cap it with another layer of clay. This created a watertight basin that acted like a ceramic cup set into the earth. The dew pond did not wait for a stream, it conversed with the atmosphere itself. On cool, clear nights, moisture from the air would condense on the cold clay surface and trickle down into the pond. Every rain shower, no matter how light, was captured and held, its water unable to seep away into the thirsty chalk below. This made the pond a reliable, year-round reservoir in a place where surface water was a fleeting memory. Its purpose was vital and direct, to provide drinking water for sheep and cattle grazing on the upland grasses. With a dew pond at the center of their pasture, farmers could utilize land that would otherwise be unusable for much of the year, effectively greening the high, dry downs. This was oasis creation on the most intimate scale, a microhydrology that required no moving parts, only a profound understanding of local conditions and meticulous craftsmanship. The dew pond stands as a quiet testament to a universal principle that aridity is a relative challenge. Whether in a blistering sand sea or on a windswept English hill, the human response is often the same: to create a still point where water can gather, a humble, handmade catch for the generosity of the sky. The Berbers of North Africa understood that the desert's most precious treasure was not on the surface, but in the darkness below. Their 21st innovation was a form of hydrological patience, a deliberate act of banking water for a future they knew would come. In the rugged Maghreb region, where seasonal rivers called wadis would rage with muddy floodwaters only to vanish for months, these communities engineered a brilliant, slow-motion capture. They constructed large, shallow basins in the path of these seasonal torrents, gently sloping depressions lined with gravel and sand. When the flood arrived, they would divert a portion of this churning, silt-laden flow into these prepared basins. Then they simply let the desert do its work. The water would spread out, slow down, and begin to seep. It would percolate down through the layers of sand and gravel, a natural filtration process that cleaned the water of impurities, and continue its slow descent until it rejoined the underground water table, the aquifer. This was not irrigation, it was recharge. They were not taking water out, they were deliberately putting it back in, refilling the Earth's own subterranean savings account. This practice, known today as managed aquifer recharge, required a long-term vision that stretched across generations. The immediate reward was not a green field, but the knowledge that the community's wells, dug into that same aquifer downstream, would continue to yield cool, clean water long after the last puddle on the surface had turned to dust. It was a covenant with the future, an understanding that the resource beneath their feet was not infinite unless they actively participated in its renewal. This ancient form of water banking demonstrates a wisdom we are only now fully appreciating in our modern era of groundwater depletion. It shows a culture thinking in cycles, not in linear extraction. Their innovation was a quiet, profound dialogue with the hidden part of the water cycle, a reminder that true sustainability often means knowing when to let the water go, so it can be found again when you need it most. Between the two great rivers, the land did not always end in sand. In the vast, shimmering wetlands of southern Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates finally spread and slow, the Madden people, often called the Marsh Arabs, faced a world of too much water. Their 22nd innovation was a breathtaking act of balance, the floating garden. Here, the challenge was not aridity, but a permanent, shallow sea of reeds and mud, a landscape that seemed to offer no solid ground for traditional farming. Their response was to reject the very idea of fixed earth and instead build their agriculture to drift. They would gather the tall, abundant reeds that were the signature of their world, bundling them into sturdy, buoyant mats. Upon these natural rafts, they layered rich mud and silt dredged from the marsh bottom, creating a portable, fertile plot that floated upon the water itself. They would then anchor these living islands with poles driven into the muddy bed, arranging them along the labyrinthine channels that served as their highways. The genius of the system was its self-watering nature. The porous reed base allowed water from the marsh to wick up into the soil constantly, keeping it perpetually moist and nutrient-rich without any need for irrigation channels or laborious watering. These floating beds became incredibly productive micro-farms, growing a variety of vegetables, herbs, and even more reeds, which were harvested to build new homes and, of course, new gardens. This was more than just a clever farming technique. It was a complete architectural and cultural adaptation to an aquatic world. Their entire way of life was built upon the reeds, from the elegant, vaulted guest houses constructed from bundled stalks to the slender canoes that glided silently through the waterways. The floating gardens turned a landscape many would see as an impediment into the very foundation of a unique and resilient society. They demonstrate that human ingenuity is not limited to conquering dry lands, but can also flourish by embracing fluid ones, creating a gentle, sustainable partnership with a world of water. This innovation stands as a powerful reminder that the line between desert and marsh is often a thin one, and that the same creative spirit that greens the sands can also learn to farm the waves. The quiet order of a floating garden speaks to one kind of water wisdom, but true urban civilization demands a different kind of control. In the bustling, sun-baked streets of Mohenjo-Daro, water was not just a resource to be gathered, but a force to be managed with mathematical precision. Their 23rd innovation was an unseen network of order beneath the feet of every citizen, a system of standardized kiln-fired ceramic pipes. While we often marvel at their covered brick drains for carrying away waste, a feat of sanitation millennia ahead of its time, the pipes tell a deeper story. These were not mere conduits for removal, but likely the arteries for distribution, bringing fresh water from central wells directly into the homes and neighborhoods of the city. Imagine a craftsman in his workshop, able to draw clean water from a tap in his own courtyard, thanks to a municipally maintained system. This was urban hydrology on a grand, planned scale. The pipes themselves were a marvel of industrial standardization, each section made to a consistent size and shape, allowing for easy assembly and maintenance. This implied a centralized authority with the power to organize production and enforce building codes, all in the service of public health. That focus on collective well-being is embodied in the city's Great Bath, a large, watertight public pool that likely served ritual or social purposes, fed by its own dedicated water supply. In a region prone to seasonal monsoon floods followed by arid periods, this infrastructure did more than prevent illness. It created a buffer against chaos. By ensuring reliable access to clean water and efficient removal of waste, the Indus Valley cities greened their world with something as vital as crops, hygiene, and social order. Their legacy is not one of monumental temples, but of thoughtful, underground engineering, a civilization that understood that the foundation of a thriving city is not what you build above the ground, but what you wisely channel beneath it. The city of Hama found its music in the steady groan of wood against water. Our 24th innovation is a testament to motion itself, the colossal water-lifting wheels known as norias. Along the banks of the Oronce River, these giants, some towering over 20 meters high, turned the river's own current into a perpetual engine of life. Their design was a symphony of simple physics. The flowing river would catch the paddles mounted along the wheel's rim, causing the entire structure to rotate with a slow, majestic rhythm. Attached to the wheel's circumference were a series of wooden boxes or ceramic pots. As each pot dipped into the river, it would fill. Then, carried upward by the wheel's rotation, it would reach the apex of its journey and tip its contents into a waiting stone aqueduct that ran level with the wheel's top. From there, gravity took over, channeling the water through a network of canals to the orchards, vegetable plots, and public gardens of the city. This was irrigation without end, a machine that worked day and night, powered by the very resource it was delivering. Dating back to the Byzantine era and perfected in later centuries, these norias were more than just efficient pumps. They were the defining heartbeat of Hama. Their continuous, graceful motion created a permanent green belt along the river, a lush corridor of fertility cutting through the dry Syrian plains. The sight and sound of them became woven into the city's identity, a symbol of resilience and ingenious partnership. They required no external fuel, no animal or human labor to turn them, only the enduring flow of the Oronce. This represents a pinnacle of sustainable design, a perfect closed loop where a natural force is harnessed with minimal intervention to sustain human civilization. The norias stand as kinetic sculptures of pure function, reminding us that the most elegant solutions often work with nature's own energy, not against it, transforming a river's song into a harvest. Beneath the watchful gaze of Bali's volcanoes, water follows a sacred covenant. Our 25th and final innovation is not merely a piece of engineering, but a living philosophy, the Sabak system. Here, in a lush tropical landscape, the fundamental challenge was not absolute scarcity, but the precise and fair distribution of a finite, life-giving flow from the crater lakes high above. The Balinese answer was to weave water management into the very fabric of society, creating an integrated hydraulic landscape where every terrace, canal, and temple tells a story of cooperation. At its heart, Sabak is a democratic water cooperative, a self-governing association of farmers who share a single water source. Each cooperative is managed through a village temple, blending practical need with spiritual duty. The system's physical genius is visible in the emerald staircases of rice paddies, fed by a meticulously maintained network of canals, bamboo pipes, and small diversion weirs that split and subdivide the flow with elegant precision. But the true magic lies in the rules, not the rivulets. Water shares are allocated based on a principle of equity, considering the size of a farmer's plot and its location along the channel, not their wealth or status. Meetings are held in the temple to resolve disputes, plan maintenance, and synchronize the complex planting and flooding cycles that keep pests in check and soil fertile. This ritual management acknowledges water as a divine gift, its careful stewardship a form of collective prayer. The result, over 1,000 years, is more than a reliable harvest. It is a breathtaking tapestry of green terraces that cool the climate, support biodiversity, and create one of the most stable and productive agricultural systems on Earth. The Subak offers a profound lesson that echoes back through all our desert innovations, that the most sustainable system is one where the resource is respected as a commons, where engineering serves community, and where sharing is not an afterthought, but the foundational ritual. It proves that greening any landscape from a desert wadi to a volcanic island ultimately depends on a shared vision, a covenant written not just in stone and water, but in the trust between neighbors. The echoes of these 25 innovations are not confined to history books or silent ruins. They hum with a quiet, urgent relevance, a blueprint for a future where water is once again our most precious currency. The common thread woven through every Qanat, stepwell, and terrace is a profound shift in perspective. Ancient societies did not see water as a mere commodity to be extracted. They understood it as the central organizing principle of life itself, a force demanding respect, demanding cooperation, and rewarding deep, place-based ingenuity. Their solutions were symphonies of restraint and intelligence, often low energy and gravity-fed, working with the landscape rather than against it. They were not standalone technologies, but systems deeply integrated with local ecology, social structure, and even spiritual belief, creating resilience that lasted for centuries. This integrated wisdom stands in stark contrast to our modern, high-energy approach. We have grown accustomed to powerful pumps that can drain an aquifer in decades, to massive dams that rearrange entire watersheds, and to chemical-intensive agriculture that demands constant irrigation. While these methods have fed billions, they have also left a legacy of depleted groundwater, salinized soil, and fractured water cycles. It is precisely this legacy that is driving a remarkable turn, a looking back to look forward. Around the world, engineers, farmers, and urban planners are re-examining these ancient strategies with fresh eyes. In the arid mountains of Chile, modern mesh nets capture fog, a direct descendant of the Guanches stone piles, providing villages with a renewable water source. In drought-stricken regions of India and Africa, NGOs are championing the revival of sand dam construction, empowering communities to bank their own water with simple, local materials. The principle of managed aquifer recharge, so carefully practiced by the Berbers, is now a cornerstone of cutting-edge water policy in places like California and Australia, where stormwater is deliberately funneled into the ground to replenish what we have taken. Even the social models are being revisited. The communal water-sharing agreements of the Subak system and the Qanat are inspiring new frameworks for managing transboundary rivers and urban water districts, emphasizing equity and collective stewardship over competition. This is not about nostalgia or rejecting modern science. It is about synthesis. It is about combining our advanced materials and global knowledge with the timeless, ecological intelligence of the past. The ancient world teaches us that sustainability is not a new concept invented in a boardroom, but a hard-won, timeless practice born from necessity. Their legacy whispers a crucial question to our era of climate uncertainty. Have we forgotten how to listen to the water, to the land, and to each other? The answers to some of our most pressing challenges, how to live within our means on a parched planet, may not lie in a distant technological future, but in the patient, proven wisdom of those who learn to make the desert sing. Their stories remind us that every drop holds a history, and every innovation, no matter how old, can be a seed for a greener tomorrow. From the hidden Qanats of Persia to the soaring Norias of Syria, these 25 hydraulic innovations reveal a breathtaking legacy of human resilience and creativity. Our ancestors did not merely endure the desert, they conversed with it, learning its secrets and coaxing forth life. This journey shows that greening the desert was about more than survival. It was about building civilizations, fostering culture, and leaving a testament to what we can achieve when we work with nature. Each terrace, each underground tunnel, and each floating garden was a dialogue, a question posed to an unforgiving landscape, and an answer patiently carved in stone, earth, and water. These were not acts of domination but of profound partnership, a recognition that humanity thrives not by conquering the elements, but by understanding their rhythm. The legacy they left behind is not just in the ruins we excavate, but in the very idea that scarcity can be the mother of profound ingenuity. As we navigate our own environmental challenges, from dwindling aquifers to changing rainfall patterns, these ancient engineers offer more than just historical curiosity. They offer a different way of thinking. They inspire us to look for solutions that are clever, sustainable, and deeply integrated with the world around us. They remind us that the most enduring answers often come from listening to the land, valuing community, and planning not just for the next harvest but for the next generation. Their wisdom, etched across continents and millennia, calls to us across time, a quiet encouragement to build with both intelligence and reverence. If you found this exploration of desert greening genius enlightening, please subscribe for more journeys into the wonders of history, and share your thoughts on which innovation amazed you most in the comments below.